The stars were silent when the alien queen returned, but the silence did not last long. Out of the endless dark came her warship, fast and shining like a black moon, its hull glowing with strange runes that pulsed as if alive. The Zarathian queen had once ruled half the galaxy and had almost crushed humanity beneath her heel. 15 long years had passed since the last war, when the combined fleets of Earth and Mars had fought her kind among the outer planets. Everyone thought she was gone forever, driven back into the cold void beyond the rim. Yet now her ship slid out of warp space without warning, shadowing the broken ruins of Outpost Sol 9. The outpost had been built by humans as a mining and research station on the edge of the asteroid belt. After the war, it had been left abandoned, its people gone, its lights dead, its halls filled with nothing but drifting dust. The Queen came to claim it as the first step of her return. Her soldiers, tall silver creatures with blades instead of hands, spread through the empty decks, searching for any trace of human life. They expected only silence, rust, and ghosts. Instead, they heard a soft sound that did not belong in war, a faint tune like the hum of a song from far-off Earth. It echoed down the corridor, light and strange, cutting through the still air. The Queen's second-in-command tilted his head uncertain. The Queen raised one clawed hand, signaling for quiet, and followed the sound herself, her long cloak brushing against the metal floor. The song led her through narrow halls marked by old scorch burns and faded human writing. Every few steps she saw something that made her chest twist in anger. A small toy robot melted by heat, a cracked human helmet with a child's sticker on it, the marks of a species that had dared to defy her. She remembered the day the humans had turned their own homeworld into a fortress and pushed her armada back. She remembered the bright fire of their resistance. Now she had returned to erase them completely. The trail of music ended at the great reactor room at the center of the station. The soldiers surrounded the door, blades raised, waiting for her signal. The Queen's eyes glowed as she scanned the metal surface. Life signs, faint but real, came from inside. Her tail twitched with curiosity. A human survivor? Impossible. No one could have lived here all these years. She gave a sharp command, and the door crashed open. Steam rolled out, carrying the smell of oil and age. What she saw made her hesitate for the first time since her arrival. There, standing in the middle of the room, was a man. He wore a faded blue uniform with the word maintenance printed across the back. His hair was gray and tied loosely at the neck. He held a mop in one hand and was slowly cleaning the floor, humming along with a small radio that crackled beside him. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The alien soldiers tensed, unsure if this was a trap. The Queen studied him closely. He was no soldier, no scientist, just an ordinary human. And yet he looked at her with calm, not fear. The man turned off the radio and lifted his head. "Oh," he said in a gentle voice, as though meeting a visitor instead of a monster. "You're early." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here, human?" she hissed. Her voice was deep and cold, shaking the dust from the ceiling. The man looked down at his mop, then at the floor he had just cleaned. "Cleaning," he said simply. "Someone has to keep the place tidy." His tone was quiet but carried something strange, something steady, like a mountain that does not move in a storm. The Queen's anger flared. How dare a single human speak so lightly before her? She stepped forward, towering above him. "Do you know who I am?" she demanded. He smiled faintly. "You used to be a problem," he said, "but I thought we took out the trash years ago." Her soldiers roared, ready to tear him apart, but she lifted a hand to stop them. There was something about this man that she wanted to understand. How had he survived? What secret was he hiding? The air in the room began to hum, and a faint vibration ran through the floor. The Queen's eyes darted around, noticing the glow of hidden panels she had missed before. The man reached down to his wrist and tapped a small device. The lights in the reactor room flared bright white. Hidden compartments opened all along the walls, and small metal spheres rose into the air. They unfolded into drones with spinning barrels and glowing blue eyes. The Queen hissed, spreading her claws, but the man only sighed as if beginning a routine task. "Welcome back, Your Majesty," he said softly. "Let's dance." The drones fired at once, filling the room with flashing light and thunder. The first wave of alien soldiers fell under the storm of plasma bolts. The Queen leapt back, shielding herself behind a field of crackling energy. Her warriors fought fiercely, slicing through drones with their blades, but the machines kept coming, guided by unseen control. The man moved through the chaos with surprising speed, ducking under beams, kicking aside debris, pressing buttons on the walls to release more defenses. His calmness never broke. He seemed to know every corner of the room, every wire, every vent. The Queen realized too late that this was no accidental survivor. This man had stayed behind on purpose. He had waited for her return. She tried to reach him, her claws slashing through the smoke, but every path was blocked by another burst of drones. Sparks filled the air like fireflies. The floor shook as explosions ripped through nearby corridors.
"You can't win, human!"
she shouted over the roar. "You are alone!" The man's voice answered through the smoke. "That's what you never understood." Then he stepped into view again, his face half lit by the burning lights. "One human is never truly alone," he said. "We build, we fix, we prepare." He pointed to the ceiling where another row of defenses came alive, and the sound of heavy machinery began to echo from above. The Queen's soldiers screamed as the ceiling split open, releasing a blinding beam that cut through the remaining troops. The Queen stumbled backward, her armor cracked, her mind filled with shock. How could a janitor do this? When the firing stopped, smoke drifted lazily across the room. The drones hovered silently, waiting for command. The Queen stood surrounded, her soldiers destroyed. The man picked up his mop again and looked at the floor covered in ash. "Now look what you made me do," he muttered. He leaned on the mop handle, breathing steadily. "You couldn't have come when the place was clean, could you?" The Queen's rage burned hotter than any star. "What are you?" she demanded. "A soldier? A spy?" The man shook his head. "Just a janitor," he said. "But someone has to take care of what you left behind." He turned toward the reactor console, tapping a few keys. A low hum rose from deep within the station, and a faint tremor passed through the walls. The Queen sensed a larger danger but could not move. Some kind of magnetic field had locked her in place. The man glanced over his shoulder. "Don't worry," he said. "This isn't for you. Not yet." Then he pressed another key, and the entire station's alarm system came alive, howling across the corridors. Red lights flashed. The Queen strained against the invisible bonds but could not break free. For the first time in many years, she felt fear. The human looked up at her and smiled again. That same quiet, maddening smile. "You came back thinking we'd forgotten," he said. "But humans don't forget. We rebuild, even when no one is watching." He paused, his eyes softening for a brief moment. "I've been here a long time, Your Majesty. Long enough to make sure this place never welcomes you again." She tried to speak, but he raised his hand. "Shh," he said. "The floors are still wet." Then he walked toward the far exit, leaving her frozen in the glow of the alarms, surrounded by the wreckage of her army and the drifting haze of dust and smoke. As the door slid shut behind him, the Queen realized the terrible truth. This outpost was not abandoned, not dead, not forgotten. It was a trap built by the same stubborn, impossible creatures who had once driven her from the stars. Somewhere deep inside the station, systems began to wake. Lights flickered to life, and the ancient hum of human machinery filled the dark again. The Queen, still bound by the magnetic field, could only watch as the janitor disappeared into the shadows, his radio starting to play once more, the same small, hopeful tune from Earth that had drawn her here. For the first time in centuries of conquest, the Queen did not know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. Humanity had been waiting. The battle began before the Queen could even take her next breath. The moment the old janitor pressed the button on his wrist, the silent station burst to life like a beast awakened from a long sleep. Drones shot up from the walls and floors, small and round but fast as lightning. Their metallic wings unfolded and their glowing eyes locked on the invading soldiers. The Queen raised her clawed hand to command her warriors forward, but the first wave of plasma fire already filled the air. The narrow corridor lit up in blue and white flashes as her soldiers were torn apart, their bodies thrown against the walls with burning holes in their chests. The Queen roared, her voice shaking the metal floor, but the human did not flinch. His name was Elias Ward, and though he wore the clothes of a janitor, his movements were sharp and trained, like a man who had survived too many wars to count. He ducked behind a power conduit, rolled across the floor, and fired a small rifle that he had hidden beneath his mop bucket. Every shot found its target. Every move he made was careful and calm. His face was covered in sweat, but his eyes stayed steady and bright, focused on the enemy ahead. The Queen's anger burned hotter with each second. She slashed her claws through the air, sending waves of energy that ripped apart the drones closest to her. Sparks and smoke filled the room. Yet, for every drone she destroyed, 2 more took its place. They moved with precision, working together as though guided by one mind. The Queen realized then that they were the human's mind. She could feel it, the quiet pulse of his control through the station's systems. He was connected to everything. The floors, the walls, the weapons, even the air vents, they all obeyed him. "How?" she hissed, her voice sharp and filled with disbelief. Elias stepped from the smoke, reloading his rifle with one smooth motion. "I've been here a long time," he said. "Plenty of time to clean, fix, and prepare." He fired again, taking down 2 more of her soldiers. She lunged at him, moving faster than sight, her claws slicing through the air like blades. But Elias rolled under her strike and slammed his hand onto a wall panel. Instantly, a magnetic field burst out, trapping her soldiers mid-leap, holding them in the air like insects caught in amber. The Queen barely avoided the trap herself, twisting free with a snarl. Her tail lashed out, catching Elias across the chest and throwing him backward. He hit the floor hard but still kept his grip on the rifle. Pain flashed across his face, but he stood again, his expression calm and stubborn. "You're persistent," she growled. "That's humanity for you," he answered, wiping the blood from his mouth. The battle raged across the station. Explosions echoed through the long metal corridors. The sound of clashing steel and screaming plasma filled every level. Drones swarmed from maintenance ducts. Automated turrets rose from the floors. Every piece of machinery that had once been part of the station's work life now became a weapon in Elias's hands. He moved through the chaos like a man who knew every inch of the place because he did. He had built, repaired, and upgraded every system over 15 long years of solitude. The Queen had thought she was invading a dead outpost. She was walking into a living fortress, rebuilt by one lonely human who refused to let the stars forget humanity's fire. Still, the Queen's power was immense. Her soldiers fought with blinding speed, their armor glowing with alien energy. Step by step, they pushed Elias back toward the reactor core. The corridor walls cracked from the pressure of the blasts. Smoke and sparks filled the air, turning everything into a blur of light and shadow. Elias ducked behind a bulkhead door, catching his breath. His hands trembled slightly as he checked the power levels on his rifle, almost empty. He looked up at a faded photograph taped to the wall beside him. It showed a group of smiling people in maintenance uniforms. His old crew, all gone now. He touched the corner of the picture, a soft smile crossing his tired face. "Almost done, guys," he whispered. The Queen broke through the door with a roar, her claws slicing through steel as though it were paper. Elias fired the last of his rifle's charge, striking her in the shoulder. She staggered but did not fall. "You cannot stop me," she said. "Your kind is weak. Your worlds are dust." Elias threw the empty rifle aside and backed toward the massive reactor chamber behind him. "Weak?" he said, glancing over his shoulder at the huge glowing machine. "Maybe, but we don't quit." He pressed his hand to a nearby control panel and the heavy reactor doors sealed shut behind them. The room filled with a deep humming sound, like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. "What is this?" the Queen asked, scanning the machinery. Elias smiled faintly. "Project Goliath," he said. "Humanity's last ace. A weapon big enough to scare even you." The Queen's eyes widened as she took in the sight before her. The reactor was enormous, reaching up into the shadows above. Thick cables ran across the floor like roots pulsing with blue light. At its center was a massive cannon, long and silent for years, now glowing with rising power. The Queen could feel the energy building, thrumming in her bones. "Impossible," she whispered. "This thing was never finished. We destroyed its plans." Elias chuckled softly. "Yeah, you did. But I had the blueprints. I used to fix the toilets here, remember? People leave things lying around." He walked toward the main console, his fingers flying over the keys. The entire room trembled as the cannon began to wake. The Queen's rage exploded. She charged forward, her claws tearing through the air. Elias dodged, but one of her strikes caught him across the side, sending him sprawling. Pain shot through his ribs. He coughed and rolled onto his back, staring up at the towering figure of his enemy. She raised her claws for the final blow. "You die here, human," she said. "Your resistance ends." Elias didn't move. He only smiled, small and tired but fearless. "Maybe," he said, "but not before I take out your fleet." He pressed a button on a small remote still clutched in his hand. The floor around the Queen glowed bright red. Suddenly, she froze in place, her armor crackling as magnetic locks trapped her in a cage of light. "Sorry, ma'am," Elias said, forcing himself to stand. "This area's restricted." The Queen screamed in fury, thrashing against the invisible bonds, but they held firm. Elias stumbled toward the main console and slammed his hand down on the final switch. The hum of the reactor turned into a roar. The lights around the cannon flared until the whole room was filled with white fire. Outside the station, the metal plates began to shift, forming a massive barrel that pointed straight into space. The Queen could feel the energy charging, gathering into a single unstoppable beam. "You'll destroy us both," she shouted. Elias looked back at her, his expression steady. "Maybe," he said quietly. "But sometimes cleaning up means getting your hands dirty." The cannon fired. A burst of pure light erupted from the station, tearing through the darkness of space like a second sunrise. It hit the Queen's fleet before they even had time to move. The first wave of ships disintegrated instantly, turned to molten fragments that spun away into the void. The others tried to scatter, but the beam expanded, slicing through them one by one. It was a weapon born not of hatred but of sheer human will, a light that carried the memory of every world the aliens had burned. The Queen screamed as she felt her army vanish, her power crumbling into dust. Inside the station, alarms blared and metal cracked from the strain. The reactor was overloading. Elias leaned against the console, watching the beam fade into the stars. The Queen's bonds flickered, her body weakening but her voice still filled with venom. "You would sacrifice yourself for them?" she asked, gasping. Elias looked up, his eyes calm. "Not sacrifice," he said. "Finish the job." He reached for another lever, sealing the chamber and cutting off all power to her armor. "You made a mess of the galaxy," he said softly. "Somebody had to clean it." The last thing the Queen saw before everything went white was the human's faint smile and the glow of the weapon still burning behind him. Outside, the explosion spread through the asteroid belt, painting the void in fire and light. Every trace of the Queen's fleet vanished, leaving only silence. Deep inside the dying station, Elias stood beside the console, the air thick with heat and smoke. He looked up through the cracked ceiling where the stars still shone and whispered, "It's done." The sound of the reactor's final pulse echoed like a heartbeat, then faded into quiet. And in that silence, the janitor who had waited 15 years to protect humanity closed his eyes, standing proud and unbroken in the light of his victory. The light that came from the weapon was not just bright, it was alive. It filled the endless dark of space like a flood of burning gold, washing over the wreckage of the Zarathian fleet. The warships that had once blackened the stars melted like candle wax, their armored hulls tearing apart under the fury of the human-made beam. The power of Project Goliath reached farther than anyone could have dreamed, cutting through layers of void until it looked as though another sun had been born near the asteroid belt. Inside Outpost Sol 9, the station groaned and shook as if it were alive and in pain. Metal bent, sparks burst from torn wires, and fire crawled across the floors. The reactor screamed under the pressure of what it had unleashed. At the center of that chaos stood Elias Ward, the human janitor who had stayed behind when everyone else had gone. His skin burned from heat, his uniform torn and dark with smoke, but he did not move away from the console. He stared at the view screen where the alien fleet was disappearing into glowing dust, his eyes tired yet peaceful. The Queen, still trapped by the magnetic field that held her, could do nothing but watch in shock. Her breath came in short, broken gasps. Her empire was dying before her eyes, and it was a single human who had done it. The explosions around them grew louder, metal tearing from the walls. Elias stumbled to his knees but kept his hands on the console, locking the final sequence of the weapon to make sure it would finish its work. The Queen turned her eyes toward him, and for the first time there was no hate in her voice, only disbelief. "You would destroy yourself for them?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You would die for a race so small and broken?" Elias looked up at her, sweat and ash streaking his face, and smiled faintly. "Not destroy," he said softly. "Just clean up the mess." He reached for the control lever, the one that would shut down the reactor's safeties. Someone has to keep things tidy. The Queen shook her head, her armor cracking and glowing from the heat. "Foolish creature," she whispered. "You throw away your life for dust and memory." Elias chuckled weakly. "That's what you never understood about us," he said. "We fight for each other even when there's nothing left to save. That's why you lost." He pulled the lever down, and the chamber filled with a deep rumble that seemed to shake the stars themselves. The floor split open, sending blinding light into the room. The Queen screamed as her power field failed, the magnetic locks snapping open, but she was already too weak to move. Flames rolled through the corridors as the core overloaded. Every system in the station was collapsing. The drones that had once flown in formation now fell silent, drifting like dead birds in the rising smoke. Elias stood slowly, clutching his side, and limped toward a small terminal near the wall. The reactor heat was unbearable now, but his face stayed calm. He tapped a few keys, opening a channel to Earth's fleet network. Static filled the air before the faint crackle of connection answered him. He spoke clearly, his voice steady despite the tremor of the collapsing station. "This is Elias Ward, custodian of Outpost Sol 9, he said. "If anyone can hear this, tell Earth. It's clean." The signal faded in and out, but those last two words carried across the stars. Then the power failed completely and the transmission ended. The Queen watched him through the flickering light. The man's legs gave out and he sank to the floor, still staring at the stars through a cracked window above. The light from the beam outside painted his face gold. She tried to lift her claws, tried to stand, but her body was failing, her armor melting into her skin. "Why?" she whispered again. "You could have hidden. You could have lived." Elias didn't answer right away. He was breathing slowly now, like someone about to fall asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice was gentle. "Because somebody had to finish the job," he said. "That's what humans do. We don't stop halfway." The reactor behind them exploded with a sound like thunder. The blast threw both of them back, and for a moment there was only fire, light, and silence. Hours passed before the human fleet arrived. They had received the faint distress call and rushed to the coordinates, but by the time they reached the site, Outpost Sol 9 was gone. All that remained was a drifting field of glowing debris, the broken remains of the Zarathian armada, and a faint energy signature still fading in the void. Captain Lena Hayes, commander of the flagship Valiant, stood on the bridge staring at the site before her. "Gods," she whispered. "What happened here?" The sensors told the story in fragments, a massive energy discharge far greater than any human weapon, followed by total silence. She ordered her crew to begin search and recovery. Small ships spread out, collecting what pieces they could find. Among the drifting wreckage they found melted armor plates that once belonged to the Zarathian Queen's guard. There was no trace of her ship, no trace of her body. Some said the explosion had vaporized her completely. Others whispered that she had been caught in the beam's core and turned to light. In the middle of it all, floating gently through the black, one of the recovery drones picked up a small object. When they brought it aboard, the crew fell silent. It was a metal badge, half burned but still readable. The letters engraved on it said E. Ward, Maintenance Crew. On the back, scratched by hand, were 3 small words: "Keep it clean." The captain held it in her hand for a long time before placing it on the control console. "He stayed," she said quietly. "He finished it." Her crew nodded, their faces solemn. No one spoke for a long while. Through the wide windows of the bridge, the stars shone brighter than ever, reflected in the drifting dust of the destroyed alien ships. Humanity had won, not through armies or politics, but through one man's courage, patience, and will. The story of Elias Ward spread quickly through the human colonies. Soldiers, miners, engineers, and pilots across the system began to tell it in their own way. Some said he had been a secret agent left behind to guard the weapon. Others believed he was just what he had said he was, a janitor who refused to run. No one knew the truth, but everyone remembered the lesson. Humanity had survived not because it was the strongest species, but because it never gave up, even in silence, even when forgotten. Across the rebuilding colonies, children learned to carve the phrase "keep it clean" into metal and stone, not as a command about dirt or dust, but as a promise to guard their worlds and keep them free from those who would darken them again. Years later, explorers who ventured into the ruins of the asteroid belt sometimes reported strange signals in the dark, faint mechanical hums that sounded like the turning of gears, the quiet brush of a mop across metal floors, and an old earth tune echoing faintly across the static. They said that when they followed the sound, their instruments went dead for a moment, and the air grew warm like the memory of fire. When they returned to their ships, they often found one small message written into their system logs. Always the same 3 words: "Still clean, Elias." Some believed it was only a ghost in the network, an echo left by the explosion that had saved them all. Others liked to believe that Elias Ward, the man who had waited alone for 15 years and saved an entire species, was still out there somewhere keeping watch, still doing his job, back on Earth. A memorial was built on the cliffs of the Pacific coast facing the stars. It was simple. A bronze statue of a man in a janitor's uniform holding a mop in one hand and a wrench in the other. Below it, carved deep into the stone, were the words of his final transmission. "This is Elias Ward, custodian of Sol 9. Tell Earth, it's clean." People came from every colony to lay flowers, bits of metal, or tools at the base. The site became a place not of mourning but of quiet pride. It reminded everyone that humanity's strength was not in its machines, its armies, or its weapons, but in the stubborn, ordinary hearts that refused to surrender. As the years passed and new wars came and went, the legend of the janitor who destroyed the alien queen lived on. Fleet captains told his story to new recruits before battle. Children on distant colonies played games pretending to be Elias, the man who cleaned the stars. And deep in the endless night of space, the place where Outpost Sol 9 had once floated became a quiet field of starlight, free from war, free from fear. The dust from the destroyed ship shimmered in the sunlight like silver snow, and every time a ship passed nearby, its crew would lower their voices in respect. Humanity had endured once again, not because of kings or generals, but because of one man with a mop, a plan, and an unbreakable heart.